We'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry anymore. They said it softly, kindly, almost lovingly. The words floated across the conference room like a blanket meant to calm a child, a promise wrapped in reassurance, a sentence designed to end resistance before it even formed. She didn't respond. She sat at the far end of the polished oak table, hands folded neatly in her lap, posture straight despite the stiffness in her shoulders. The room was too cold. The air conditioning hummed quietly, steady and indifferent, like it always did in places where decisions were made without the people most affected ever truly being heard. Around her they nodded at one another. Her brother-in-law cleared his throat, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "This is the most efficient way," he said, glancing toward the others for agreement. "Given your situation, her situation." That was how they framed it now, as if it were a medical condition, as if grief had somehow rendered her incapable of understanding her own life. Her sister-in-law leaned forward, offering a sympathetic smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You've been through so much," she said. "No one expects you to manage these things alone. That's why we're here." They were always here now, ever since the funeral, ever since the house stopped being loud with condolences and became quiet with calculations. She noticed the folder placed gently in front of her. Cream-colored, thick, heavy with papers she had not requested but was clearly expected to sign. She didn't open it. Instead, her gaze drifted to the far window, where the city rose in muted grays beyond the glass. Traffic crawled below, oblivious. Life continued at its own pace, indifferent to promises being made in climate-controlled rooms. "We'll handle the accounts," her brother-in-law continued, "the properties, the outstanding obligations. You won't have to deal with banks or lawyers or—" "I understand," she said quietly. The room paused. They hadn't expected her to speak. Her voice was calm, even, not weak, not trembling, just measured. Her sister-in-law blinked. "You do?" "Yes." There was something about that single word that unsettled them. Not enough to stop, but enough to exchange brief glances. "Well then," her brother-in-law said after a moment, smiling again, "that makes this even easier." He slid the folder a few inches closer. She still didn't touch it. The documents inside were prepared carefully, professionally. Pages flagged with small adhesive tabs where signatures were required. A pen placed precisely where her hand would naturally fall if she reached forward. Everything had been arranged. That was the phrase they liked best. Everything. They had started saying it the week after the funeral, when the casserole stopped arriving and the phone calls from friends slowed. "We'll take care of everything." They said it when they suggested she move out of the house temporarily, just until things settle. They said it when they volunteered to review her finances for her own protection. They said it when they insisted on accompanying her to meetings she hadn't scheduled. And now they were saying it here, in a room booked under their names, with documents drafted by lawyers she had never met. She lowered her eyes to the folder at last. Her sister-in-law exhaled, relieved. "Good," she said softly. "Just sign where we've marked. We don't want to drag this out." Drag this out. As if this were an inconvenience, as if her life had not just fractured into a before and an after. She picked up the pen. Her brother-in-law smiled wider. But she didn't sign. Instead, she flipped the folder open. The first page was dense with legal language, as expected. Trusts, transfers, temporary authority, interim management. She scanned slowly, deliberately. They shifted in their seats. She could feel the pressure building. Not overt, not yet, but present, like hands gently guiding her toward a conclusion they had already reached. "This part here," her sister-in-law said, pointing to a paragraph halfway down the page, "is just procedural. It allows us to act on your behalf while things are uncertain." "Uncertain." She traced the line with her finger. "I see," she said. Her brother-in-law nodded. "Exactly. And this section," he added quickly, tapping another page, "just ensures continuity. Bills get paid, assets protected. No mistakes." No mistakes. She turned another page, and another. They had done a thorough job. She could give them that. It was all very reasonable, very responsible. Every clause dressed in the language of care, of protection, of necessity. If someone were watching from the outside, it would look like a family stepping up. That was the narrative they were counting on. She reached the final page. The signature line waited patiently at the bottom. her name typed neatly beneath it. She rested the pen just above the paper. Her sister-in-law leaned back, satisfied. "See," she said, "we told you. We've taken care of everything." The words landed differently this time. She looked up. "Everything?" she asked. Her brother-in-law chuckled lightly. "Everything that matters right now." That was the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a subtle shift. Because for the first time she smiled. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, and it made her sister-in-law uncomfortable. "I appreciate the effort," she said. "Truly." Her brother-in-law waved it off. "Family takes care of family." She nodded. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly why I wanted to read this carefully." The air changed. Her sister-in-law stiffened. "There's really no need." "I prefer to understand what I'm signing," she replied, still calm. Her brother-in-law's smile tightened. "These were prepared by professionals." "I'm sure," she said, "but they concern my name, my property, my future." Silence crept in around the edges of the room. It wasn't open hostility yet, just a hairline crack in their confidence. Her sister-in-law laughed softly, trying to smooth it over. "You're overthinking. That's normal. After everything you've been through." After everything. She closed the folder. The sound was quiet, but final. "I won't sign this today," she said. The sentence was gentle. The reaction was not. Her brother-in-law's chair scraped slightly as he leaned forward. "There's really no reason to delay." "I disagree." Her sister-in-law's smile vanished entirely. "We're trying to help you." "I know." "Then why are you making this difficult?" She met her gaze. "I'm not," she said. "I'm being careful." Careful. That word hung between them like an accusation. Her brother-in-law exhaled sharply. "Look," he said, dropping the warmth from his voice. "This is how these things are done. You don't need to involve yourself in the details." She tilted her head slightly. "Why not?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Because," he said, choosing his words, "it's complicated." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "it is." And then she added, almost casually, "Which is why I'll be bringing my own counsel." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Her sister-in-law stared at her. "Your own... what?" "Lawyer," she said. "Accountant as well." Her brother-in-law laughed, but it came out sharp. "That's unnecessary." "Is it?" "Absolutely. We've already retained—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I saw the firm's name on the footer." They froze. She tapped the closed folder lightly. "Page 3, she continued. "Bottom left." No one spoke. Her brother-in-law's jaw tightened. "That firm represents you," she said. "Not me." Her sister-in-law scoffed. "They're neutral." "No," she said quietly. "They're not." She stood then, slowly, carefully, as if she had all the time in the world. "I won't sign anything today," she repeated. "I'll review this with independent counsel and respond in writing." Her brother-in-law rose as well. "You're making a mistake." She gathered her coat. "Perhaps," she said, "but it will be my mistake to make." Her sister-in-law crossed her arms. "You think you can manage all this on your own?" She paused at the door. "I don't think I'm alone," she said. "I think I've just been underestimated." She left the room before they could respond. Behind her, the folder remained on the table, unsigned, and for the first time since they had started promising to take care of everything, uncertainty settled in, not over her future but over theirs, because they had assumed her silence meant surrender. They were wrong, and they had no idea what she had already begun to prepare. They didn't call her that evening. That alone told her everything she needed to know. The silence wasn't respect, it was strategy. They had expected panic, tears, a late-night message asking for reassurance, or worse, an apology. They expected her to second-guess herself, to feel guilty for causing trouble, to worry she had misunderstood something important. Instead, she went home and slept for 7 uninterrupted hours. The next morning, she woke early, made coffee, and opened a notebook she hadn't used in years. On the first page, she wrote a single sentence. "Assume nothing is accidental." That had been her husband's rule. He used to say it quietly, usually after meetings where everyone smiled too much and spoke too gently. He didn't trust people who rushed decisions or offered help before it was asked for. And for the first time since his death, she felt close to him again, not through grief, but through clarity. By noon, the messages started. Her sister-in-law texted first. "We were worried." Yesterday felt tense. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be. She didn't reply. An hour later, her brother-in-law emailed, "We need to move forward. Delays can create unnecessary complications." Still, she didn't reply. She spent the afternoon doing something they never imagined she would do. She asked questions, not dramatic ones, not confrontational ones, quiet ones. She called the bank her husband had used for decades, not the branch her brother-in-law preferred, but the main office listed on an old statement she found in a drawer he had always kept locked. She didn't explain the family situation. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply said, "I'm reviewing my financial records and would like copies of all statements associated with accounts in my name." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course," the woman said politely. "I'll need to verify your identity." They did, and then the tone changed. "Mrs. Hale," the woman said slowly, "there are several accounts here that haven't been accessed in some time." "I'd like copies of everything," she replied. There was another pause. "Yes," the woman said, "we can do that." She hung up and wrote another note in her notebook. Delays reveal patterns. The next call was harder. She contacted the county records office, property deeds, transfers, titles. She expected bureaucracy, red tape, being told to call back later. Instead, the clerk sounded cautious. "Ma'am," the woman said, "some of these records are flagged for review." "For what reason?" she asked. "I can't say," the clerk replied, "but if you'd like copies, you'll need to submit a formal request." "Then I will." By the time she hung up, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Her brother-in-law. She let it ring. He called again. She answered on the third ring. "We need to talk," he said, skipping pleasantries. "Yes," she replied. "We do." His voice hardened. "This is getting out of hand." She smiled faintly. "Is it? You're creating problems where there are none." "From my perspective," she said calmly, "the problems already existed." Silence. "You don't understand how complex this is," he said at last. She recognized the tactic immediately. Make her feel small. "I understand enough," she said. "No," he snapped. "You don't. And frankly, it's irresponsible to involve outsiders." She walked to the window, watching pedestrians cross the street below, each carrying their own invisible burdens. "Why?" she asked. "Because it undermines trust." "Whose trust?" she asked. His breath caught. "Our families," he said. She turned back toward the room. "Then perhaps transparency would strengthen it," she replied. He laughed humorlessly. "You're being paranoid." She ended the call. That night, she met with an attorney. Not the kind her brother-in-law hired. Not someone whose name appeared on billboards or in glossy brochures. She chose someone quiet, older, recommended by a retired judge whose name she remembered from her husband's stories. The office was modest. The shelves were full of binders, not awards. The lawyer listened without interrupting. She didn't dramatize. She didn't accuse. She laid the folder on the desk and said, "They asked me to sign this." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read, slowly, carefully. The silence stretched. After several minutes, he closed the folder. "Did they explain this to you?" he asked. "They summarized it," she said. He nodded once. "They summarized it in their favor." She didn't react. "What does it do?" she asked. He tapped the page lightly. "It gives them temporary authority." "Over what?" He met her eyes. "Almost everything," she inhaled slowly. "And if I had signed, they would have controlled access to your accounts, your properties, your legal decisions." "For how long?" He turned another page. "That depends on how long the interim period lasts." "Which they define," she said. "Yes," he replied. She leaned back. "And the language?" she asked. "Is it standard?" He hesitated. "Standard enough to pass casual review," he said, "but not standard enough to be harmless." She nodded. "Is it legal?" she asked. He paused again. "Yes," he said carefully, "if you consent. And if I don't, they have no authority." She exhaled. "For now," he added. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "For now?" "They can petition," he said, "argue incapacity, claim urgency." She didn't blink. "They're already implying I can't manage," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I noticed." She sat silently for a moment. "What would you advise?" she asked. He folded his hands. "I'd advise gathering information before they do," he said, "and preserving it." "Preserving what?" "Records," he replied. "Communications, documents." She smiled faintly. I've already started. That earned her the first genuine smile of the evening. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. Family dinners became interventions. Concern was weaponized. Her sister-in-law showed up unannounced with soup and questions. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "You look tired." "I'm fine," she replied. "You don't have to do this alone," her sister-in-law insisted. "I'm not," she said. Her brother-in-law sent articles about grief impairing judgment. A cousin she barely spoke to suggested a temporary conservatorship for peace of mind. Each gesture was framed as kindness. Each carried the same message. "You can't handle this. Let us do it." She responded to none of it directly. Instead, she worked. She reviewed bank statements that didn't align, properties listed under holding companies she didn't recognize, transfers dated just weeks before her husband's death. Nothing illegal on its face, but nothing accidental either. She noticed something else too. Every document funneled authority toward the same two people, her brother-in-law and his wife. By the time the council meeting was announced, she was ready. They framed it as routine, an administrative review, a chance to clarify matters and put everything to rest. Her sister-in-law called the night before. "We don't want this to feel adversarial," she said. "It won't," she replied. "Truth rarely is." The council chamber was larger than she expected. Neutral walls, flags, long desks arranged in a half-circle, authority made visible through furniture. Her brother-in-law sat confidently near the front, speaking quietly to a man in a grey suit she recognized immediately. The lawyer. Their lawyer. She took a seat alone in the back row. She felt eyes on her. Pity, curiosity, dismissal. When her name was called, she stood, slowly, calmly. She walked forward without hesitation. Her brother-in-law smiled thinly as she passed. The chairwoman glanced at her file. "We're here to determine the most appropriate course of action," she said, "given the circumstances." Her brother-in-law rose. He spoke smoothly, professionally. He described her grief, her isolation, her difficulty engaging with necessary processes. He framed the documents as safeguards. He framed himself as responsible. The council nodded. She remained silent. When it was her turn, the chairwoman looked at her kindly. "Would you like to respond?" she asked. "Yes," she said. Her voice carried. "I would." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "I have questions." The room shifted. Her brother-in-law stiffened. "What authority?" she asked. "Did you assume when you prepared documents transferring control of my assets?" He smiled. "Temporary authority. For efficiency." "And when?" she continued. "Did you notify me that those documents were drafted before our meeting?" He hesitated. The pause was brief, but it was enough. "I assumed," he said. "That was understood." She nodded slowly. "And the accounts moved 3 weeks prior," she added. "Was that also assumed?" The room went still. The chairwoman frowned. "What accounts?" Her brother-in-law's smile faltered. "I'm asking," she continued, "because I've requested independent records." She turned to the chairwoman. "I will submit them formally." Her brother-in-law stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate," he said. "She's confused." She looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "I'm prepared." And for the first time, doubt crept into the room, because they had planned for her silence. They had planned for her compliance. They had not planned for her to speak with precision, and they had no idea what records were about to surface next. The room didn't erupt into chaos. That was the first thing she noticed. No shouting, no dramatic objections, no raised voices demanding order. Instead, there was something far more dangerous for the people who had underestimated her. There was hesitation. The council members exchanged glances. Not alarmed ones, curious ones. The kind that signaled uncertainty had entered the equation. Her brother-in-law felt it immediately. He tried to recover with speed. "Madam Chair," he said, forcing calm into his voice, "this is exactly what we were concerned about. Misinterpretations, stress-induced confusion." She didn't respond to him. She turned instead to the chairwoman. "I requested certified copies of records tied to my name," she said. "Not summaries, not explanations, originals." She reached into her bag and placed a slim folder on the table. The sound was soft, but it landed heavily. The chairwoman hesitated before opening it. Inside were statements, deeds, dates highlighted with careful precision. "3 weeks before my husband's death," she continued, Temporary holding accounts were created under structures I was never informed about. Her brother-in-law's attorney stood. "With respect," he said quickly, "these documents don't establish wrongdoing. They represent routine estate planning measures." She nodded once. "I agree," she said calmly. "They don't establish wrongdoing." The attorney blinked. "They establish authority." That wasn't what he expected. She turned another page. "They establish who moved first." The chairwoman adjusted her glasses. "Who initiated these transfers?" she asked. Her brother-in-law spoke before anyone else could. "I did," he said, "at my brother's request." "Do you have documentation of that request?" the chairwoman asked. He hesitated. "Verbal instructions," he said. The silence deepened. Her attorney, seated quietly behind her, leaned forward for the first time. "Madam Chair," he said evenly, "we would like to submit additional correspondence." The room stilled. She hadn't told her family that she had retained counsel. That had been intentional. The chairwoman nodded. "Proceed." Her attorney placed several printed emails on the table. "These communications," he said, "occurred after Mr. Hale was already hospitalized." Her brother-in-law's jaw tightened. The chairwoman scanned the dates. "These appear to discuss asset consolidation," she said slowly. "Yes," the attorney replied, "without the consent of the surviving spouse." Her sister-in-law shifted in her seat. "This is being twisted," she said sharply. "We were trying to protect her." She turned toward her. "Then why wasn't I informed?" she asked. Her sister-in-law opened her mouth, closed it. "I was grieving," she continued, "but I wasn't incapacitated." The chairwoman cleared her throat. "At this point," she said, "we need clarity." She looked directly at the brother-in-law. "Why were these measures taken without formal documentation from the account holder?" He exhaled slowly. "Because time was critical," he said. "Critical for whom?" the chairwoman asked. "For the estate," he replied. The chairwoman's expression hardened slightly. "The estate," she said, "does not supersede the rights of the surviving spouse." The brother-in-law's attorney interjected again. "With respect," he said, "this is becoming adversarial." She spoke before the chairwoman could respond. "No," she said quietly. "It's becoming accurate." That landed harder than any raised voice could have. The meeting was adjourned temporarily. They called it a recess, but everyone in the room understood what it really was. A pause to reassess. In the hallway, her brother-in-law confronted her. "You blindsided us," he hissed. She looked at him calmly. "No," she said. "You ignored me." Her sister-in-law joined him, her tone trembling with indignation. "How could you do this to family?" She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't," she replied. "I asked questions." The brother-in-law stepped closer. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "You don't know what you're up against." She met his gaze. "I know exactly what I'm up against," she said. "People who thought silence meant permission." He laughed coldly. "You think this is over?" he asked. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The next move wasn't hers. It was theirs. And they were already making it. 2 days later, the petition was filed. Emergency guardianship, temporary incapacity, language carefully chosen to sound compassionate. The papers arrived by courier. She read them without shaking. The accusation was subtle but clear. She was no longer capable of managing complex affairs. Her grief was impairing judgment. Intervention was necessary. She called her attorney. "They've escalated," she said. "Yes," he replied, "as expected." "What happens now?" she asked. "They'll need proof," he said, "and so will we." She closed her eyes briefly. "Good," she said, "because I have more." The following weeks were brutal, not because she was afraid, but because the pressure was relentless. Friends called with concern. Extended family whispered. Some avoided her altogether. Others offered advice she hadn't asked for. "You should let them help. They're just worried. Why are you fighting this?" She learned something important during that time. Power didn't shout, it isolated. Her brother-in-law controlled the narrative. He framed her as stubborn, as confused, as grieving and unpredictable, and many believed him, because it was easier than questioning a man who spoke confidently and wore tailored suits. But confidence wasn't evidence, and she had evidence. She sat across from her attorney late one evening as he reviewed the final set of documents. "These records," he said slowly, "are significant." She waited. "They show intent," he continued. "Patterns, repetition." "Enough?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "enough to shift the burden." She exhaled. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Final. Decisive. The room would be full. Council members, legal representatives, family, observers. Her brother-in-law arrived early, flanked by advisors. She arrived alone. She wore no jewelry, no colors that invited sympathy, just quiet composure. When her name was called, she stood. The judge glanced at her briefly, then back at the file. "We are here," he said, "to determine whether temporary guardianship is warranted." Her brother-in-law's attorney presented first. He spoke of concern, of protection, of responsibility. He painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by grief and complexity. When he finished, the judge turned to her. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "you may respond." She stepped forward. She didn't speak immediately. She looked at the judge, then at the room, then she spoke. "I have never asked anyone to manage my life," she said. Her voice was steady. "I have never been declared incompetent." She paused. "And I have never consented to the transfer of my authority." Her attorney stood beside her. "We submit," he said, "that this petition is not about protection." He placed a thick file on the table. "It is about control." The judge raised an eyebrow. Her attorney opened the file. "Over the past 6 months," he continued, "a series of actions were taken without the petitioner's knowledge." He presented timelines, emails, transactions. The judge leaned forward. The room was silent. Her brother-in-law's confidence eroded visibly. "These actions," the attorney said, "were framed as assistance, but they consistently excluded the one person with legal authority." The judge turned to the brother-in-law. "Is this accurate?" he asked. He swallowed. "Yes," he said, "but—" The judge raised a hand. "Answer the question," he said. "Yes," he repeated. The judge nodded slowly. He turned to her. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "do you understand the scope of your estate?" "Yes," she replied. "Do you require assistance managing it?" "No," she said. "Do you wish to delegate that authority?" "No," she said again. The judge sat back. "Then the petition is denied." The words echoed. Her sister-in-law gasped. Her brother-in-law stiffened. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "this court will review the actions taken prior to this hearing." The color drained from the brother-in-law's face. "This matter," the judge continued, "raises serious questions." He looked directly at them. "And this court does not appreciate being used as a tool for coercion." The gavel struck. It was over, but it wasn't finished. As she walked out of the courtroom, she felt no triumph, only release. They had promised to take care of everything. They had sealed their own fate, and the consequences were only just beginning. The silence that followed the judge's ruling was heavier than any argument that had come before it. It wasn't the kind of silence born from shock alone. It was the kind that arrived when a carefully constructed illusion collapsed all at once, leaving nothing behind to hide behind. Her brother-in-law didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the bench as if the judge might reverse himself, as if authority could be negotiated after it had spoken. But authority had already chosen its side, and it wasn't his. The courtroom began to stir, quiet murmurs, chairs shifting, whispers spreading like ripples through still water. People who had entered believing one story were leaving with another. She remained still. She didn't smile. She didn't look at her family. She didn't need to. Her attorney leaned in slightly. "This isn't over," he said softly. "But the direction has changed." She nodded once. Outside the courthouse, the press was already gathering. Someone had tipped them off, perhaps a clerk, perhaps an observer who recognized the pattern before the ruling even landed. Her brother-in-law pushed past her without a word. Her sister-in-law followed, eyes wide, face pale. They didn't stop. They didn't look back. She walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, as if she finally had the time she had been denied for months. A reporter stepped forward. "Mrs. Hale," she called out, microphone extended. "Do you have a comment?" She stopped. She turned. "I trusted my family," she said simply. "And then I trusted the law." She paused. "One of those did its job. That was all." She left. Within 48 hours, the audit began. The council didn't announce it publicly at first. They never did when they suspected wrongdoing. Quiet investigations were far more effective. They asked for documents. They reviewed communications. They traced decisions backward, following the paper trail she had preserved, while everyone else assumed she wouldn't notice. Her brother-in-law was summoned for questioning, then again, then a third time. His advisors stopped returning his calls. The board he had once chaired requested explanations. The bank froze several accounts pending review. What had begun as a move to simplify matters was now being labelled something else entirely. Conflict of interest, breach of fiduciary duty, coercive control. Her attorney updated her regularly. "They're finding patterns," he said one afternoon. "Repeated behavior." She wasn't surprised. When people believed someone was powerless, they became careless. Her sister-in-law reached out first. A voicemail, tearful, apologetic. She didn't return it. The apology wasn't for her, it was for themselves. The following week, formal notices were issued. Her brother-in-law was removed from his advisory role pending investigation. His name was quietly erased from several committees. No announcements, no statements, just absence. She attended the final council review not as a subject, but as an observer. This time she sat in the front row. The chairwoman addressed the room. "Mrs. Hale's case," she said, "has raised concerns beyond individual circumstance." She glanced briefly at her. "It has highlighted systemic vulnerabilities." The council voted unanimously. New safeguards, mandatory disclosures, independent oversight for estate management involving vulnerable parties. The language was careful, but the message was clear. They had underestimated the wrong person. Outside the chamber, a former council member approached her. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She studied his face. "For what?" she asked. "For assuming silence meant agreement." She nodded once. "People mistake the two often," she replied. 6 months later, the consequences had fully matured. Her brother-in-law accepted a settlement to avoid further litigation. It included restitution, public resignation from multiple boards, a clause prohibiting him from managing estates for a decade. His reputation never recovered, not because of headlines, but because trust evaporated quietly in rooms where power actually lived. Her sister-in-law filed for divorce. Her reasons were never public, but those close enough understood. She returned to her home, not the one they had tried to manage for her, the one she chose. She simplified her life, not because she was incapable of complexity, but because she no longer needed to prove anything. She established a foundation, small at first, focused, legal advocacy for surviving spouses navigating hostile estates. She didn't give speeches, she didn't attend galas, she funded attorneys, quietly, effectively. One afternoon she stood in the same courtroom where everything had changed, not as a defendant, not as a petitioner, but as a witness. She testified in a case that mirrored her own. Another widow, another family, another attempt to control under the guise of care. When she finished, the judge thanked her. She stepped down. The woman she had testified for looked at her with tears in her eyes. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. She shook her head gently. "You were just surrounded," she replied. Years later, when asked why she never spoke publicly about what happened, she offered a simple answer. "Because justice doesn't need narration," she said. "It needs follow-through." They had promised to take care of everything. They had smiled. They had assumed compliance. Instead, they had triggered accountability and sealed their own fate. Silence, they learned too late, is not the absence of power. It is often the moment before it moves. If this story held your attention, consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a comment. Your support keeps these voices heard.